Ever just kind of zone out, Like you're somewhere totally different, even if it's just for a minute.
Happens to all of us.
Right. But what about when those little mental escapes, those daydreams, become kind of like all-consuming? That's what we're diving into today, maladaptive daydreaming.
And it's a lot more intense than just spacing out. It's like stepping into a movie, but you're directing it, writing it, the whole shebang. Characters, plot lines, vivid details.
Wow. Yeah, that's some serious imagination. But it makes you wonder, why does this happen? Why do some people's brains kind of go into overdrive like that?
Well, a lot of times it can be traced back to deeper stuff. Trauma, for instance.
Oh, so creating a world where maybe that trauma doesn't exist?
Exactly. A way to escape, even if it's just in your mind. It's a way to find a little relief.
So it's almost like a coping mechanism in a way.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
But it's not always trauma. Stress, anxiety, those can also be triggers. Like your brain's just hitting the pause button on everything.
With how hectic life can be, I can see the appeal there. But at what point does it become like something that needs attention? When does it cross that line from just daydreaming into something more serious?
Well, it all comes down to how much it impacts your life. Like imagine missing a job interview because you were so caught up in a daydream.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
That's when it becomes maladaptive, when it starts messing with work, relationships, even just taking care of yourself. And it can get even more serious than that.
What do you mean?
Well, some people, their daydreams, they kind of bleed into reality a little.
Oh, so it's not just in their head?
Right. And that can be really dangerous, especially in situations where you need to be totally present, like driving, for example. Mm-hmm. And while it's not officially recognized in the DSM-5, the big book of diagnoses, researchers are doing some interesting work in this area.
So there are ways to actually measure and study this?
Exactly. The Maladaptive Daydreaming Scale, it helps us understand how vivid these daydreams are, how strong the urge is to have them, and most importantly, how much they're interfering with someone's day-to-day.
It's kind of reassuring, actually, that there are ways to actually study this, It means it's being taken seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the good news is it's not hopeless. There are definitely things you can do to regain control, so to speak.
Okay, so it's not about never daydreaming again, right? Because that seems kind of impossible and sad, honestly.
Right. We all daydream, and that's fine. It's more about finding a way to manage it so it doesn't start managing you.
So how do we do that? Why do we even start?
Well, mindfulness can be a really powerful tool.
Okay, mindfulness, beat. I'm not going to lie, sometimes when I hear that word, I just want to zone out even more.
Beat, I get it. It can feel a little abstract,
Yeah.
But in this context, think of it less about emptying your mind and more about noticing what's happening in it.
Okay, so self-awareness.
Exactly. It's about catching those early signs before you get totally pulled into a daydream. Think of it like noticing the on-ramp to the highway before you're going 60.
Ooh, I like that analogy. So what are some of those on-ramps we should be looking out for?
Could be anything, really.
Mm.
Maybe you feel a little restless, or you just really don't want to deal with what's happening right in front of you. Maybe there's even a physical sensation, like your heart rate speeds up a little.
So once you notice those signs, then what? How do you actually stop yourself?
That's where having a few calming techniques up your sleeve can really help. And the good news is, there's no right or wrong here. It's about finding what works for you.
Oh, so it's like building a personalized de-stressing toolkit, basically.
Exactly. Some people find that physical activity really helps, even if it's just for a few minutes. Like a quick walk, some stretches, whatever gets you moving.
Yeah, I gotta love those endorphins. Although sometimes you need something a little faster, like if you're in the middle of something and can't just drop everything.
Totally. In those cases, even just taking a few deep breaths, splashing some cold water on your face, that can be surprisingly effective.
And I'm guessing things like journaling, talking to someone you trust, those could also be helpful, right? Especially if there are some deeper emotions at play.
Absolutely. And sometimes just distracting yourself can do the trick. Put on some music, pick up a hobby, even just moving to a different room can disrupt that urge to daydream.
It's kind of empowering, actually, having all these different options. No pressure to find the one perfect solution.
Exactly. It's all about experimenting, figuring out what helps you feel grounded, present.
This is all super helpful. But what about when you do get swept up in a daydream? Any tips for getting back to reality in those moments?
This might sound a little out there. But remember, you're the one creating these daydreams, right? So you can actually build in little cues to help you disconnect.
Wait, like little escape hatches within my own imagination? Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Exactly. Maybe it's a certain door in your daydream world that when you open it, always brings you back. Or maybe there's a character who gently reminds you that it's time to focus on reality again.
That is so smart. Love that we're using our own imaginations against themselves, so to speak. And hey, if you have people in your life who know about your daydreaming, maybe you could even have a signal with them, right?
Absolutely. Having that outside support can be incredibly helpful. Sometimes we just need someone to gently guide us back to the present moment.
So we've got mindfulness, our toolkit of calming techniques, our imagination escape hatches. But I feel like there's another piece to this puzzle, isn't there? We've talked about all these ways to manage these really intense daydreams, but it seems like we're kind of focusing on the symptoms. Shouldn't we be trying to get to the root of the problem?
That's where therapy can be so helpful. A good therapist can really help you dig into those deeper issues that might be driving those daydreams. Could be trauma, could be anxiety, could be a whole bunch of things.
So instead of just trying to make the daydreams stop, it's more about understanding why they're happening in the first place.
Right. Maladaptive daydreaming is often a coping mechanism, even if it ends up doing more harm than good. Therapy can help you find new ways to cope, healthier ways, so you're not so reliant on those daydreams.
It's kind of amazing, though, when you think about it. The fact that our minds can even create these whole worlds like that says something about our imaginations, right?
It really does, and that's what makes maladaptive daydreaming so interesting. It's not just some weird quirk. It's a window into our deepest desires, our fears, all that stuff we might not even realize we're carrying around.
So for anyone listening who's relating to all of this, what's the one thing you want them to take away from this deep dive?
If your daydreams are taking over, if they're keeping you from really living your life, please know that you're not alone, and there is help out there. With the right support, you can find a way to manage those daydreams and start living a more fulfilling life in the real world.
That's a really important message. And it's a good reminder that asking for help is never a weakness. It takes a lot of courage to face those tough emotions and make a change.
I completely agree.
Well, on that note, I think we've done a pretty deep dive on maladaptive daydreaming. We've talked about what it is, why it happens, and how to deal with it. But before we go, I'm going to leave you with one last thing to think about. If our daydreams are a glimpse into our deepest desires, what would it look like to bring some of that creativity, that sense of possibility into our everyday lives? Just something to ponder. Until next time, keep exploring and keep diving deep.